Well, good afternoon. I am one of the guilty ones who buy books from Amazon. But I think I've been thoroughly chastened, so I'll start looking at Africa World Books now. Well, it's a pleasure to come to this launch of the website, and just to meet also authors and readers. Elizabeth asked me if I would talk about the importance of reading and writing, partly because my job has to do with reading and writing, but partly because I'm also interested in writing about Africa and Africans, and probably that's where I'll start from. Most of you are aware of the United Nations and the various organs of the United Nations, especially UNESCO. UNESCO is a body which is concerned with education, culture, science, and one of the big projects that UNESCO was involved in the early 70s was to rewrite the history of Africa. And many times I've asked our students who come to VU whether at all they have read any of those volumes by UNESCO. And the commonest answer is no, we are not aware of them. And that's a bit sad. Now, UNESCO embarked on that project because a lot has been written about Africa and Africans, and a lot of that is false, if not deliberately misrepresented. So UNESCO organized scholars across the world, those that were experts in African history, anthropology, archaeology, etc. And they came up with a set of 8 volumes of the general history of Africa. In those volumes, the history of Africa has been retold, and a lot of the history that people have read about Africa, and a lot of information that people get through the media has been exposed. That it is not. The reasons that makes them socially, economically disadvantaged is that they think they cannot do anything about themselves. Most of them have resigned to a fatalistic attitude. Oh, we Africans can't do anything. Or it's our fate to fight one another and kill each other. Or you can't unite Africans. Or you can't do this. And if you go back to find out those ideas where they come from, they are not original. They are ideas that have been implanted in people's minds because of a process known as colonization. And colonization still rings in the minds of the people through the practices that have been left behind. Unfortunately, most of us have a lot of it, even though we would like to say we don't. Because we grew up in that system. We imbibed that system. Colonization, in as much as colonization is something that happened not only to Africa, it happened to many parts of the world, Asia, Middle East, and so on. But I'm talking about Africa. Colonization was something that affected Africa very seriously, very significantly. It was the big colonizing nations of Europe who met after bickering among themselves in the early 1880s to be exact, 1884, 1885, they decided that, oh, let's not fight among ourselves. Let's go and meet in Berlin and decide on how we can slash up that piece of land known as Africa, divided peacefully among ourselves. Now, they did not invite any of us, but they went in Berlin, laid across the table the map, and took pencils and pens and drew lines across here. This one you take that, this one you take that, this one you take that, and so on. That history you know very well enough. But what brought that practice, or rather what that practice brought, was a system of division. So because this line is drawn across here, you who are on this side are different from those that are on this side. And you very well know what happened in Rwanda. You are Hutu, you are Tutsi. And it still goes on in the Congo today. You're different, this way, you're that way. And so a lot of the conflicts that we have today in Africa have to do with what colonization in part brought along. Further to that, colonization found practice. Now, it wasn't dark to the Africans. It was dark to those that did not know Africa. But it was labeled a dark continent because they didn't know what was in Africa. Traded with Africans along the coast of Africa. They did not go in, that's why it remained dark. And within that dark continent, there was a lot that was happening. I have a small book in my Kindle. Unfortunately, this is Amazon. Known as, if you want, it relates the various achievements and practices that Africans had from earliest times to about 1700s, when colonization began to affect them. It is also commonly said that Africans didn't have education, they were poor, they were down, they were this and that. And most of us have accepted that, oh yes, we were the poor ones and down, we never had education. So, oh, who are we? We can't do anything. And that kills confidence of a lot of people. But history has it. Read UNESCO's 8 volumes. Read some of these books, which you can readily find on Amazon, and you will discover that Africans had education, and very good education too. Africans did write, and those records still exist today. In West Africa, families still hold on to some of their own writings. Africans had scripts. At least I know of 4 scripts which Africans had well before colonization. It's one of them, and several others. So Africans did write. They had their own script. The British didn't have a script. They got it from the Romans who colonized them. But we had our own script. But the British brought it along. The French brought it along. It was a script which they got from the other colonizer. So there are a lot of things which you would find out in history that they've been falsified or misrepresented. And UNESCO, now this is not Charles, this is UNESCO, had a project to correct all those things. And those books are available. You can actually download them free of charge if you want PDF versions. But you can also buy the volumes, abridged or full versions and abridged versions. So history has been retold, but we need to know it. Hence, I've come here to encourage you to read it, because without that you don't know yourselves, and you believe things that you shouldn't believe about yourselves. Further to that, we find ourselves in Australia today, and we've made our home. And some of you have a double-minded kind of existence. I'm in Australia, I'll go back to Africa, I'll live here. It's a double-minded. Be settled, you're here, it's home. Australia is home. And you're raising up children here in Australia who probably may not go back to South Sudan. They are happy to be Australians. But I believe they would want to know their background. Don't you want to keep a record of who you are? You would want to write your history. You would want to preserve your stories. I know one thing rich in Africa is storytelling. Storytelling is like drinking water. It's part of the commonest thing. Those kinds of practices, as you live in a different context, which now you take for granted, may be lost. Slowly but surely they'll be lost. You want to keep a record of that. You want to keep them alive. So writing is not only to make money out of, but it also to keep a memory. Every important civilization has kept some memory of themselves. So what you read about the Romans, they select what is good to represent and the world to read thereafter. Not everything was glorious, as probably some would like us to believe. Not everything was glorious. But memory is selective. You select what is the best, and you keep it and you pass it on. And we believe that you guys also have some good memories of what Africans in Sudan were, or South Sudan have been over the several years. And you'd want to pass on that memory. You can keep it well, not only by telling them by word of mouth, but also by writing it. So I believe we need people like Mike, my colleague is here, who can team up with you and you write books and so forth for children and others for adults. And today, with technology, it's not only paper and pen. You can preserve a lot of memory digitally. So you can write books, pen and paper. You can preserve a lot of things with the digital technology. I would like to see some of those dances I watched when you were celebrating the independence or the secession of South Sudan. Not only preserved on tape, but what about these young ones if they would also learn those dances and keep it going? It's interesting. So I believe we have a task to do. Those of us who have come here fully grown up, we understand well South Sudan. The children that you're raising here will ask you something. Can you tell us about South Sudan? You'll be scratching your head. You'll start forgetting shortly. Write it down. Keep it. Keep the memoirs of South Sudan. All those practices you had, your own experiences. And the other experiences you may want to capture. Experiences about your own experience of moving over from Sudan to here. In some cases, circumstances which are not very pleasant, but they are part of our history. Preserve it, keep it, write it. There are some people in Australia who would want to know how you came to Australia, or why you came to Australia. There are some people that would like to read that and understand the circumstances. Sometimes you just assume, oh, these guys simply came here because they wanted to come. No, there were some factors which forced you to come. Do you want to write that? Preserve it. Let the world know these are the things that have happened in our lives, in our lifetime. And probably some of us will learn a lesson how we can stop some of those horrendous things from happening again. So there's a lot that writing and reading would help ourselves and those people who have welcomed us here in Australia to understand us and to know us. Mind you, Australians, most of them have never been to Africa. So if you don't tell them about Africa, they won't know. So tell them about Africa. You may not find them to tell them face to face. Write, they'll read. Put a video together, they watch it. Put a film together, they watch it. So different ways of telling people about Africa would be important. Somebody did a short survey among students, I think it was secondary or primary. How many have heard about Africa? Never heard about Africa? Some said, yes, we have. What have you heard about Africa? Oh, there are lots of lions. Lots of elephants. Oh, yeah. And some said, there's war. So bits and pieces that people know are so disjointed and useless. Can you tell a coherent story which people would know? And say, oh, yeah, I would want to visit South Sudan. I think I would want to visit Kenya. I think I should visit Uganda. Because there's this that I can see, there's this that I can experience, and so on. Put a coherent story together, let people know about Africa, and let it be a true story. Most of what people get, snatches of it from the media, is very distorted. So can you write it yourselves? Don't expect others to write it for you. You write it yourself in the way you want it understood, in the way you want it represented. And I think that way we can let Australia know what Africans are, what Africa is. And that way they will understand us. Cross-cultural understanding would be better if people know you. But if they don't know much about you, they will keep wondering and keep theorizing about you. In some cases, you'll be complaining, oh, they don't understand us. If they don't, tell them. Then they will understand you. Or sometimes I think there's a lot of racism here. No. In many cases, it's because people don't know what to do with you. Tell them what you are, who you are. So tell Australia who you are, what Africa is. They will appreciate Africa. They will appreciate Africans. Participate fully. Don't seclude yourselves out there. Oh, we are Africans and we can't mix. Oh, no, we are ourselves. No. You're in Australia, folks. You live here for long. Although you think you'll be going home very quickly, but you live here for long. And your children would love to live here. So settle down, tell your story, get to know Australia and Australians, and let Australians know us and Africa as well. So we call ourselves African Australians. Let us be African Australians. I rest my case here.
Thank you, excellent. All the speeches have been fabulous today, haven't they? We've laughed and we've thought and we've puzzled. It's really been fun. Thank you so much. Now, Michael Hyde. Michael is an academic who works with children's literature, children's writing, and we're hoping to do some really exciting things with Michael's help for our children. So, Michael.
Thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me. I feel quite blessed. I read an article recently about multiculturalism in Australia. Very strange. It sounded as though in the middle there was this big pole called Anglo-Saxon, and all the rest of the cultures danced around it. And yet this Anglo-Saxon pole was the main one. Whereas in actual fact, we've never been anything but a country of migrants. I have so many bits and pieces in me, but I'm still considered a skip. I taught 26 years in the western suburbs, and that was the term that the boys and girls used from other countries for the Anglo-Saxon students, skips. I thought it was a pretty good name. There were the wogs, there were the chinks, there were the skips. To some extent it made me really understand. And when I then slid over, I don't quite know how it happened, but to Victoria University. And I've been a sessional, which is a casual tutor and lecturer in other universities. I, quite frankly, wouldn't teach anywhere else. I look up at my students in creative writing in the first week. And I look at them, and I look at them, and I look at them. And I say, when you were writing, don't you dare forget your background. Don't you dare forget your culture when you were writing. I said, I remember a Turkish girl in year 10 at Brunswick Tech who used to write the most wonderful, wonderful stories. Her name was Onur. I said, I've been reading your stories, Onur, and I noticed that all the people are called John and Mary. I said, I didn't know that they were really common Turkish names. She said, well, they're not, I'm just trying to fit in. And I said, and you write wonderful romance stories, beautiful romance stories, and yet your symbolism is always what I called skipified. And so I said, next time you want to see a boy and a girl, she wrote, their love for each other was as warm as Turkish bread coming out of a wood fire. I will never forget that. And so I say to my introduction to creative writing, and it's become an enormously popular subject because people have understood how, and it is, Charles, you're so right. I look around my room here, I'm pretty certain I see some of my old students here, quite frankly. And I look at my creative writing, and there's nearly 250 doing it. There's more and more and more coming to do it because they say, even if we're going to be doctors, even if we're going to be forensic scientists, even if we're going to be vets, even if we're going to be netball coaches or whatever, they've decided that writing might be something good for them to know something about. And I said, I now want you to have a look at everybody in this room. I said, I want you to have a look around this lecture, and it's filled. And I said, and I want you to check out how many different cultures you see or you suspect you see in this room. I said, if you're going to write stories, write any stories you like. But don't, I'm going to patent this word. I don't have it anyway. I said, don't you dare skipify your writing. Don't you like me? Do it properly. And a Sri Lankan girl, young woman with 2 kids, had been brought up by a single mum and her grandmother had gone from Sri Lanka to come here. She turned out to be a beautiful, beautiful writer. And after their writing, they had to do a commentary. It's called a critique, about explaining why they chose to do this and why they chose to do that and how they chose to do this in their writing. And she said, I thought of doing something about living in Australia, but I thought that would be done by a lot of people. So she decided that she would tell us a story about living in Sri Lanka and being brought up by a single mum and a single grandma in Sri Lanka, in Colombo. And in her commentary she said, and the thing that made me write that was Michael in the lecture saying, don't you dare skipify your writing. So I have been teaching people from so many different languages and so many different cultures, and I felt, I was laughing at myself, but when Charles was saying it, I thought, geez, I know nothing. I know nothing. When I was young, I used to read and listen on the radio to a series called Biggles. He wrote a book, Captain W.E. Johns wrote a book about going to darkest Africa. And I never forget, Bertie went up to speak to the clerk. The clerk listened, and these were the stories that I read and read and read, and I thought that this was normal. And I hope I pronounced her name correctly. Her name is Nedal Nyon. I'll get it wrong. And Kakuma refugee camp it is called. And she was going to write something else, and I said, a story for God's sake that nobody else knows. And this is the most extraordinary story I have ever read, and this is the creme de la creme published in this book. It's international standard. I don't remember how I got there, for now the beginning doesn't matter. I know it was on the shoulder of a person travelling with the masses, running away from our war-torn country. The elders ordered that we travel through the night because it was cooler, and most importantly, the darkness provided protection from the hunters. I say hunters because our status as human beings was not taken into account by those who searched for our blood. We soldiered on, enduring the worst, to search for a place to settle, to fulfil our basic need to live. I sat in the evening watching the sun set on this barren land. Glowing shades of orange, pink and yellow swam across the mud hut buildings with their grass roofs. Oh, I love sitting high in the tree branches with my legs dangling overhead as people finished their day below. Watching the women sweeping and singing, getting covered with dust as it rose, and the young children coming home from the street with water for cleaning and cooking. The men can only be reached by the songs, for they are not here taking care of their families. They are back home fighting for Uru. Later we shall sit around the fireplace, and the women shall entice our imagination with songs and stories from the land left far behind. This is Kakuma. Kakuma refugee camp, as it's officially known, was established in '92 in the northern part of Kenya. It is hot, dry and humid, barren and remote. The locals have the best of this land. Not much has changed occurred in this part of Kenya. I doubt even the government knew about these people. This was a God-forsaken land, a mixture of ignored citizens and stateless refugees fighting over scarce resources. This was indeed a land of the forsaken, forgotten and voiceless, hidden from modernity and civility. Not that a more prominent location would have done us any service. And I'll just read one more paragraph. 40 degrees. Everything in this place is just the same as the day before. A scenario that my friends describe as same shit, different day. She wrote it, I didn't. There is much to do, no cattle to herd, and no land to cultivate because it bears no fruit. This differs vastly from back home when cattle herding is the focus of daily life and central to creating stable Sudanese identities. But we have to soldier on regardless. And then I'll just read this bit here. It's talking about a song, which I won't even attempt to translate, but it's about making pancakes, and it goes something like, Ewa Dambo. As our voices echo on the sheet iron roof, the smell of boiling porridge wafts through from the kitchen. It erases the visions of aeroplanes and computers. This was our life now, simple, plain, unstructured. This was Kakuma. I spoke to her sometime later when she tried to write, and Mphande does not get annoyed with me telling this story because it's such a great story for everybody to hear. Christmas. That story got a high distinction, by the way. And I said, what are you writing about Father Christmas for? She says, oh, well, you know, it's something that the kids can get, and I'd like to try and write something that's kind of... This has power, beauty, poetry. This just seems like fairy floss, wafting away in the wind, meaning nothing. I said, I would love you to go and write something else that means something. she went away and wrote something that was just as brilliant as that one. I came to understand something. I've been teaching writing for a long time, and I've said to Charles and Elizabeth, I'd be very, very happy to be involved in the writing workshops for children. Writing heals us. It doesn't just tell us stories, it actually heals us. I've had a few problems in my life recently, and I said to my wife before I left, I said, you know what's going to be good about this afternoon? I'm going to be I've just been to a place where an Italian person and a Samoan boy had done their honours performances in art. I said, I'm here, and I said, and I'm going to come across 90% of people that as like an ant compared to, there is one thing that I do know, this is how I would like to finish. There has never been one community of human beings ever on the face of the planet Earth, not one has ever lived without story. Every single community, doesn't matter where, told their lives and healed themselves and explained things through story. We need stories like we need fresh air, food, water, shelter,